First of all, yeah, thank you. Hopefully, yeah, the words from our friend are right actually, because yeah, on SREday Paris, I was talking about reliability for OpenTelemetry, and now I will change the subjects a little bit because it's the instrumentation quality. So it's very specific topic on the telemetry area. But before I start my talk, who is familiar with the OpenTelemetry, just to see how it goes? Okay, yeah, yeah, we have plenty of good OpenTelemetry guys here. So first, who am I? Pretty straightforward. My name is Yuri Oliveira. I live in Porto here. I'm a co-founder at Oligarden, and we help companies there to improve their OpenTelemetry pipeline efficiency. Probably who is familiar with the OpenTelemetry is tired to see this diagram, because this is basically how OpenTelemetry works. But who is not familiar with this diagram, it's basically explaining the OpenTelemetry project. OpenTelemetry consists of 3 steps, I would say: the receivers and the OpenTelemetry collector per se, and the exporter. So basically, your applications are transmitting telemetry data to the OpenTelemetry collector, which is the engine of this project. And this project do all this process stuff like enriching the data. It can be traces, metrics, logs, and so on and so forth, and transmit data over to Datadog, Dynatrace, Grafana, and whatever backend you have in your infrastructure. The advantage of that is the first thing, vendor agnostic. Again, this is a pretty, I would say, selling motto for the OpenTelemetry usage. But just to give you a perspective, this is how a trace, a metric, and log looks like in the OTLP format. So you don't need to convert this format to any observability backend that you have, but just keep the same format and send each signal over to your backend. The second advantage is about the unified telemetry. So you don't need, yeah, between air quotes, you don't need, because I advocate in favor that you use the OpenTelemetry natively. But nowadays, I see companies using like the agents from each backend. You can have a unified telemetry if you use the OpenTelemetry collector. So basically, you have a configuration file where you define it like, I want to transmit data to Caralogics, Datadog, Dynatrace, and so on. And you don't need, I would say, too much toil in your observability pipeline. Another, I would say, advantage would be the native correlation, because OpenTelemetry defines that, let's say, in a magic way. Like you can have the trace ID in the trace, of course, and also in the log. So for the SRE guys, for the platform guys, it gets easier to correlate different signals when you get an alert at 2 a.m. And as a bonus, I don't know how many of you know that information, but OpenTelemetry is the second most active project in the CNCF landscape, only below Kubernetes. So for, let's say, the leaders of the industry, it's a kind of signal that the project has some continuity. So the community is active, the project will, yeah, receive new updates, bug fixes, and this is a good sign to the future. But how to start that? If you are a software developer that you want to instrument your application, or if you are I would say, a SRE or platform engineer, you have to find the first step, this balance between your manual and auto instrumentation. Again, I'm advocate in favor of the most native way to do the thing. So I would advocate in favor of your manual instrumentation, because I truly believe that we have to produce telemetry that is purposeful to your business. So telemetry that adds real value to your business. But I understand that in some companies doesn't have, I would say, much effort, or I would say a lot of people to take care of the telemetry area. So they go to the auto instrumentation. So the auto instrumentation will catch all the signals, traces, metrics, and logs, profiles not yet, from the Java application or a Go application and send data over to our backend. So when you see your data on the backend side, you are going to see a lot of unnecessary data. But anyway, you have to find this balance at this very first step. And when you find this balance, unfortunately, if you decided to move forward with the auto instrumentation, you will be in a dawn trap. This is because I call this talk like beyond dawn, because you've decided to go to the auto instrumentation and you instrumented actually your application. So you have logs, you have traces, and you have metrics. You are happy because the data is flowing to the pipeline. And also your dashboards are amazing. But as I would say, our colleague just mentioned in the previous talk, only about 20% or 50% the data is really used. But the data are there. The dashboards, again, are amazing. And your SREs at 2 a.m. are using really this data, are, I'd say, generating the real value for your business based on the data that you just generated. But at the end of the day, the company is happy. We have observability. But is it really done? Anyone is familiar with those issues, like cost overruns, like semantic conventions, like high cardinality metrics, like telemetry reliability, like useless attributes, often spans, auto instrumentation, a huge complex pipeline. I believe a lot of you are familiar with those issues. And you are familiar also with that. This is a public stuff. This is not from my company. This is from Coinbase. If you Google that, this is real. Okay, so if you don't care about your telemetry quality, unfortunately, you will be in this dawn trap. So reaching this amount of money to your backend. But at this point of this talk, what means actually this dawn status? So it means that this data now came from my company. 70% of the spends are basically implementation code. So what is the real value about having the slash health or health Z on your spans each, I don't know, 5 milliseconds or each 3 milliseconds? If you have at least, I would say, one per minute or one per hour, I don't know, it will generate more value than having one each 5 milliseconds. I would say 15 to 20% of the trace are incomplete. Imagine that you use trace to catch your issue and you are a SRE guy with incident 3 a.m. and when you catch up the trace ID, one trace and one span. And then you put the hands on your head and say, oh my God, what should I do now? Because I have no information. I cannot say track the product owner because I don't know where this request came from. Also, the cardinality explosion. Who is familiar with the cardinality explosion here? Sorry, guys, you laughed at this. But imagine one company producing one metric, and this company has thousands of customers, and the developer has put a customer ID into a metric label. What that means, the metric will be multiplied by the times of the number of customers. Do you know how much that costed? 20K a month for one single metric. Imagine multiplied by the number of metrics and the number of services you have in your, I would say, applications. But again, the dawn status right now, you implemented everything, You have metrics, traces, and logs again, but you didn't notice any reduction on your MTTR or in your MTTG. But we have observability, right? And why we have observability and we didn't notice any reduction on this topic? Because the data quality was not improved. So check again also your telemetry and see if this cardinality explosion cannot also represent a PII leakage. Because imagine, I mentioned the customer ID, but imagine a situation that the developer, the same developer, has put a telephone number instead of the customer ID. So in one specific PR, you have two issues. First, one high cardinality metric and also a PII leakage. But how many of you ensure that you don't have this case in your infrastructure right now? So no, it doesn't work anymore. And the probably, again, you have heard about the three pillars of observability: traces, metrics, and logs. But what are the three pillars of a bad telemetry? So basically, the side effects, the main shapes, and the staleness. So the side effects is if you have a bad telemetry, you can produce PII leakage. If you have bad telemetry, you are running in an overcost. If you have also main shapes of your telemetry data, you can miss also the context propagation. Because if you have traces, why you are forgetting to propagate the context? Doesn't make sense. Again, the data governance is also inconsistent. I've seen companies with different squads and imagine I would say a label for a metric, attribute for a metric is organization. And one squad declared the organization. The second one declared org underline ID. And the third one declared like org. Where is the data governance? You don't have basically. Again, also the stillness in the SREday Paris. I was talking about the reliability because also if you are concerned about the open telemetry per se and also the instrumentation and so on, it's okay. But if you don't be concerned about the reliability of your OpenTelemetry collector, if you don't activate the metrics, if you don't activate the logs for the collector per se, you are going to lose some stuff. So how to measure the telemetry quality? Because Yuri mentioned a lot of bad things that can happen in our telemetry, but how can I have this diagnostic? How can I measure if my telemetry is a bad one or a good one? In the very beginning of this year, now I believe it's new information. How many of you is familiar with this instrumentation score project? Yeah, none. Yeah, the instrumentation score is a collaboration from all of the observability backends. So basically, this project declares the rules, the specifications, what means a good telemetry. So it means you cannot have the bug log activated for more than 14 days in your production environment. This is a basic rule, right? But happens. You cannot have often spans. You cannot have a high cardinality metric. So all the rules that represent a good telemetry are declared on these instrumentation scores. And I know that we've heard a lot about the Datadog costs and so on, but they are also interested to see cleaner data because if the customers are sending cleaner data, the accuracy of alerts, dashboards, data per se are higher. So they are also interested to do that. For that reason, we have on the instrumentation score, this is an open source project. We have contributions from Datadog, from Dynatrace, Grafana, and so on and so forth. Sorry. And just to give you an example about the instrumentation score, we have a rule called 001 from the metric signal and to describe the high cardinality issue. So the description like metric attributes have bound cardinality. So if you don't follow this rule, you are going to lose some points on the instrumentation score. You can see all the formula to calculate your instrumentation score. And each of these examples you can use to have the telemetry diagnostic. So just to give you an example, the user ID that I mentioned before, this is how a metric looks like at the OpenTelemetry format. And this user ID means that you have a high cardinality. Often spans. So the spans 002, this is the rule that means traces do not contain often spans. This is a pretty basic rule. And how do you see that? On the validate users or in the beginning of the function, you don't have any parameter to propagate the context. Also, the log severity set. Log severity set, this is not basic. All the developers set the severity on the logs reports. So just to give some perspective for you, or just a quick question before I pass to the next slide. How many of you believe the unknown severity is higher than 10% in one public backend, the observability backend? Is higher than 10%? The unknown, I'm not talking about error logs, I'm not talking about info, I'm not talking about the bug, just unknown. Is higher than 10? Maybe. Is higher than 20%? Production logs is 25.7%. Unknown logs from production. I'm not talking about dev or staging. It's for production. What do I do with unknown logs? What represents unknown logs? How much of this 25%, if I remove them, if I don't use them, how much of this will be deducted from my observability bill? So I talked a lot about bad things, but now good things. The three pillars of the instrumentation or good instrumentation quality, like signal consistency, signal completeness, and also correlation. Again, please, if you use OpenTelemetry, follow the semantic conventions. Again, have a consistent attribute usage. If you have many squads, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, please ensure the squad 1 is using organization, the squad 2 is using the same organization attribute, and the 3, and so on. Okay, please do this. The 3, also the simply strategies. If you use trace, do like tail simpling if it's possible, because you don't need to send 100% of your traces, because I'm quite sure it will cost you a lot. Also, again, the signal completeness, don't produce the often span. I came from the SRE industry, I came from the platform industry, and I see, I would say, a big headache when I check a often span in front of me at 3 a.m. Also, the context propagation, please ensure that your developers are propagating the context to have a proper trace formatted, and also the correlation, right? Because, okay, you can have the trace ID, but it will be better if you can correlate with logs. Thank you. My name is Yuri, and let's stay connected.
All right. We have time for questions.
Yeah.
So you know the drill. Raise your hand and I'll get you a microphone. There's one in the front. There we go. Excuse me. Try not to trip.
So very interested on the instrumentation score. But my question here is, how do you calculate that score consistently in production? It's just like a spec from what I saw in the repository. Have you seen like implementations where it's being done in open source way?
Yeah, in the open source way, we don't have any platform to calculate for you. But the idea behind the instrumentation score was giving you the specifications to calculate a good telemetry. But for example, my company, we have the instrumentation score natively in our platform and so on. But we don't like the idea to get this instrumentation score in a private way. We prefer to open source that because it gives you the opportunity, if you want to implement those rules internally, you can implement and calculate the instrumentation score for your services. It's like that. But the specification and the formula, as I mentioned in the repo, you can see the formula to calculate the score properly.
And have you seen actionable steps based on that score, or is it just like another metric?
No, yeah, we have actionable, let's say, insights about those issues, but you have to check all of the specs. For example, if you are using Go and you forgot to propagate the context, yeah, through the functions, and then you have some remediation to do it, like for offense bans or like for the bug log. Your SRE activated the bug and forgot to deactivate, and after 14 days, your platform or Holy Garden will check in and let you know, hey, please deactivate this log because it's generating the bug log during those days.